Where did the name, Persia, actually come from? The surprising answer isn't found in the name of a conqueror. It comes from somewhere inside the family tree of a Greek hero who once slew a monster. But here's where it gets interesting. The answer most people think they already know doesn't point to just one person. Some traditions name one figure, others point to someone completely different. And the bigger question underneath all of this: why would Greece want to place the origins of its greatest rival inside its own mythology? This isn't just a quiz about who the founder was. It's really a story about how people make sense of powerful forces they don't fully understand. When a mighty civilization rises from far away, one way to deal with it is to pull it into your own story, to call it a distant relative, to give it a name from your own bloodline. That's how the ancient world worked. The unfamiliar wasn't left alone. It was named, placed in a family tree, and explained on familiar terms. So what we're really looking at today isn't just one person's face. It's an old civilizational habit of absorbing the other into the self. Most people picture Persia as a vast empire, enormous territory, immense wealth, countless peoples, and the memory of head-on clashes with Greece. But the Greeks didn't leave Persia as simply an outside force. They went out of their way to connect it to their own mythological bloodlines. As if to say these people aren't completely foreign. Go back far enough, and their story touches ours. That wasn't just imagination. That was a way of organizing the world. The first name that comes up is Perseus, the hero who killed the Gorgon, rescued a princess from a sea monster, and left behind a long line of descendants. Most people stop right there and assume the answer is obvious. Perseus sounds like Persia, case closed. But the story doesn't stop there. In fact, that's exactly where it gets complicated. Because the older Greek traditions, when explaining the name of the Persian people, focus less on the hero himself and more on one of his sons. That son's name is Perses. The names are close enough to blur together in subtitles or in conversation. But mixing them up unravels the whole story. In the Greek tradition, one of the sons born to Perseus and an eastern princess stayed in the east, and it's from his name that the Persians were said to take theirs. The message is clear. The Greeks wanted to describe Persia not as an alien other, but as a people connected to the next generation of their own heroes. And I think this moment is worth pausing on, because it isn't just a piece of mythological trivia. It reveals one of the oldest patterns in human behavior. People can't sit comfortably with the completely unfamiliar for very long. When something is too strange, it becomes frightening. And when it becomes frightening, the instinct kicks in to explain it. But that explanation almost never starts from scratch. It reaches for stories already known, orders already trusted, bloodlines already familiar. In other words, humans translate before they understand. The reason Greece wanted to call Persia a descendant of its own heroes wasn't affection for that empire. It was the need to turn something overwhelmingly strange into a shape that could be lived with. So to me, this tradition isn't just a genealogy. It's the technology of turning fear into meaning. The line between civilization and the outside world isn't only drawn with swords. It's drawn the moment a name is given. And understanding, more often than we like to admit, is just another word for taming. Think about what that does. A powerful unknown enemy is a source of shapeless dread, but the moment you can say, that enemy is actually a distant branch of your own hero's bloodline, the world becomes a little less threatening. Still dangerous, still formidable, but at least explainable. They're no longer chaos. They're part of a lineage. That's where myth becomes something more than knowledge. It becomes a tool for softening the world, for wrapping anxiety in words, for turning an overwhelming reality into a story you already know how to tell. But the story doesn't end there, because another name appears. When people talk about the origins of Persia, Achaemenes, this name doesn't show up as a central hero in Greek legend. It matters when the conversation turns to the founding of the Persian royal dynasty. And this is where a lot of people make the mistake of flattening two separate stories into one. The story of where the Persian people got their name, and the story of where the Persian royal family got its authority, are not the same kind of story. One is about the origin of an entire people, The other is about the legitimacy of a ruling house. The founder of a nation and the founder of a dynasty don't always stand in the same place. Miss that distinction and everything gets tied up too neatly. You end up saying Perseus is basically this. And that's really just another name for so and so. And in the end it's all the same thing. But the moment you say that, the real texture of these traditions disappears. Ancient lore was never a clean, organized chart. It overlaps, crosses, sometimes connects and sometimes diverges. Different regions emphasized different things. Different eras wanted different ancestors. Some stories cared deeply about the origin of a name. Others cared more about royal prestige. Holding those differences in place is what lets you actually see the whole picture. At this point, it starts to look less like a question about names and more like a question about how people organize the world. Every time I look at a founding figure, I keep arriving at the same thought. A founder isn't someone who was simply there first. A founder is a face that the present calls up because it needs one. People tend to think of founders as beginnings. But in many cases, a founding figure isn't a record of origins. It's a declaration of order. We ask where we came from, but what we're really doing is deciding who we need to be, and then choosing the ancestor that fits. A people builds a founding myth to look like a people. A dynasty reaches for older bloodlines to look like a dynasty. A civilization constructs a genealogy to make itself look like something inevitable rather than accidental. The confusion around founding figures isn't just error. It's evidence. Evidence of what that society needed to justify what it wanted to make look natural. In that sense, a founding figure isn't just a name. It's the way a group of people convinces itself that its own existence makes sense. Mythology preserves facts, but founding figures preserve desires. And that's exactly why these old names are still fascinating. So the most interesting question in all of this isn't who the correct answer is. It's why there seem to be two answers at all. Why do some traditions emphasize Perses, while others push Achaemenes to the front? The answer is actually straightforward. They're trying to explain different things. One tradition wanted to account for the name Persian as a people. The other wanted to establish the deep roots of the royal family that ruled them. The root of a name and the root of a throne don't have to travel the same road. That's not strange. That's completely natural. And right at that point, Greek imagination steps back in. Some traditions connect the royal dynasty's ancestry back to Greek heroic bloodlines as well. This is important to hold carefully. Being connected to something and being the same as something are completely different claims. Ancient traditions often build bridges. Instead of saying two things are totally separate, they find a moment where one lineage eventually reaches back to a particular hero. That brings an unfamiliar dynasty inside a recognizable story, but it doesn't make them the same person. A bridge and a merger are not the same thing. Hold on to that distinction, and this complicated subject suddenly becomes much clearer. Here's an image worth sitting with for a moment. Imagine you're a person living in ancient Greece. Across the sea, a massive empire is moving. Armies, ships, and wealth are all pushing in one direction. Rumors are exaggerated. Fear is growing. Political calculations are collapsing. How do you make sense of that? You can't pull up maps, statistics, or research papers. You work with stories. Where did that nation come from? Why is it so powerful? What does it have to do with us? And if the answer arrives through the family tree of your own beloved hero, that reality becomes far easier to absorb. This wasn't just a mental exercise. It had real political weight. In the ancient world, lineage and origin stories functioned as diplomatic language. Saying our ancestors once shared a common root wasn't just flattery. It was a tool of persuasion, a reason not to fight, a way to encourage neutrality, a wedge to drive between allies. Ancestral stories weren't sentimental, they were political instruments. People are moved more easily by stories than by logic. Saying, "we share the same blood," even loosely and mythologically, was the kind of claim that could actually change behavior. Seen in that light, the tradition of tying Persia to a Greek hero's bloodline isn't just a creative exercise. It's a very practical way of thinking. To understand a great empire, you need to place it inside a great story. Greece lived with its mythology at the center of the world. Any significant rival eventually had to find a place inside that mythology. Persia was simply too large to leave outside it. A minor tribe might not have earned that treatment. But Persia was different. It had to be fought, remembered, and explained. So the genealogies got to work. We tend to treat myth as the realm of exaggeration and fiction. But myth was actually a remarkably precise instrument for handling reality. It turns the unfamiliar into the understandable. It transforms a foreign people into a hero's descendants, a distant city into a god's footprint, a military enemy into an estranged branch of the family. That process is close to the heart of what myth actually does. Not recording things as they are, but rewriting them into shapes that can be carried. In that sense, myth isn't the enemy of truth. It's the enemy of anxiety. And yet most people still want a one-line answer. Who was it? Perseus? Perses? Achaemenes? That question moves too fast. Ancient stories don't close that way. A better question is this: when Greece set out to explain Persia, why did the hero's son matter for one purpose while the dynasty's ancestor mattered for another? And why did later traditions keep trying to draw a line between the two? Sit with that question, and you escape the trap of looking for the single right answer. People are drawn to clean resolutions. One name, one person, one explanation. It makes for a satisfying title, an easy comment to leave, a fact that sticks in memory. But that's exactly where it gets dangerous. Because ancient traditions are far less tidy than we want them to be. Similar sounding names don't automatically mean the same person. A connection in one tradition doesn't mean agreement across all traditions. The complexity isn't a mistake. It's the original state. Accept that, and the story comes alive. And honestly, that complexity is what makes this subject so compelling. Because it isn't just about mythological knowledge. It's about how a civilization deals with the other. Greece didn't look at Persia and simply see an enemy. It saw something that was testing the edges of its own story. How far does our narrative reach? How far can our hero's bloodline extend? Can a foreign people really exist outside our story entirely? Those questions layered on top of each other. And Persia stopped being just an enemy state. It became a figure that the story had to account for. What's especially striking about this is that Greece didn't fully demonize the Persians. They feared them, fought them, and were deeply suspicious of them. But at the same time, they placed them inside their own hero's lineage. That looks like a contradiction, but it's actually very human. We can't fully erase the figures that matter most to us. The more we fear something, the more we want to understand it. The more we need to keep it at a distance, the more deeply we narrate it. Total dismissal is only possible for things that don't really matter. The truly significant always ends up inside the story. So the confusion around Persia's founding figure isn't a failure. It's a trace of just how intensely Greece was paying attention to Persia. When there's one tradition explaining the people's name, another building the dynasty's authority, and a visible desire to bind both of them back to a single heroic bloodline, that's not careless mythology. It means the subject was too large and too layered to fit inside a single name. Let me pull it together simply. In the Greek mythological tradition, when people explain the name Persian, Perses, the son of Perseus, is the figure closest to the center. When people explain the founding of the Persian royal dynasty, Achaemenes is the name that carries weight. And some traditions reach even further, connecting that dynasty's ancestry back to Greek heroic bloodlines. These are connections, not identities. The moment you treat them as the same thing, the explanation becomes easier. But the tradition becomes hollow. Hold the distinction and the story gets a little more complicated, but a lot more true. What we shouldn't lose sight of is that for ancient peoples, genealogy wasn't a family hobby. It was a map of the world. The moment you established who was connected to whom, you fixed the positions of peoples, cities, and dynasties in relation to one another. Mythological kinship was also a measure of real distance. Call someone a far branch of your own ancestor's tree, and they are no longer fully foreign. That's how myth folds a wide and complicated world into a single thread of bloodline. taking something vast and wrapping it around one continuous line of descent. That's the real power of these stories. From that angle, the question of Persia's founding figure reaches beyond names. It isn't really about who is correct. It's about why those names were needed at all. Why did Greece push the origins of a whole people into a hero's genealogy? Why did it want the dynasty's roots touching its own story? 2. The answer is deeply human. People fear what they don't understand. What they fear, they try to explain. And when they explain, they always reach first for the stories they already know. We're not so different today. When we try to understand a foreign country, we instinctively translate it through familiar comparisons, before we're willing to learn it on its own terms. Ancient myth just does the same thing more openly, and more honestly. So the one image worth taking away from all of this is this. Greece didn't leave Persia standing outside as a foreign empire. It pulled Persia into the frame of its own heroic narrative. And in doing so, the tradition, explaining the people's name and the tradition building the dynasty's authority, overlapped and diverged and created something layered and complicated. The confusion that results isn't noise to be cleaned up. It's the text itself. Because inside that ambiguity, the ancient world's way of seeing is still intact. The kind of clarity we tend to expect from the past comes with dates, names, and one right answer. But the old world, where mythology and tradition were woven together, didn't work that way. A single name becomes an entire people. A hero's child becomes the seed of an empire. A dynasty's ancestor gets folded into another civilization's story. This isn't a rough draft waiting to be finalized. It was always meant to exist this way. It survived without being tidied up, and that's exactly what makes it feel real. And maybe that's the real reason this subject stays so compelling. We started by asking who the founding figure was. But by the end, we're looking at something much larger. When a civilization encounters a powerful other, how does it find a place for that other? Inside its own world? The moment you call your enemy a distant cousin of your own hero, fear takes on a shape you can work with. Once it has a shape, it becomes a story. Once it becomes a story, it lasts. In the end, names often outlast armies. And when you follow how a name was made, you aren't just reading a family tree. You're reading the psychology of a civilization. So the best conclusion around Persia's founding figure is quieter than you might expect. Don't close it down too fast with a single name. Keep the tradition about the people's name, and the tradition about the dynasty's founding separate. And notice the Greek impulse to pull both of them into the same heroic lineage. That's where the real substance of this story lives. Not in finding the one right answer, but in seeing the desire to create one. Not just in how the other was understood, but in the method of that understanding itself. That's what keeps this ancient question alive and worth asking again. In the end, here's what this story comes down to. Persia was too significant for Greece to leave as simply foreign. The names rhymed, the traditions tangled, the genealogies built bridges, and because of that, some records place the hero's son at the root of the people, while others put the dynasty's ancestor out front. The very gap between those two is what shows us most clearly. Even when ancient people tried to understand their enemies, they started with their own stories first. So let me close with the question we started with. Where did the name, Persia, actually come from? Pointing to one person is the comfortable answer. But the ancient answer is always a little more interesting than that. The name didn't fall cleanly from a single hero. It was formed at the point where heroic bloodlines, a people's origin story, and a dynasty's authority all reached toward each other and became entangled. And it's that entanglement, more than any clean answer, that turns this into something worth remembering long after the video ends.